Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be jumping back into our faction focus for BLKOUT, looking at the Task Force Boone force. Now this is a newer army as of this video for BLKOUT, and there is a lot of information to cover for these guys. There's a lot in the impact document that covers everything. So we're going to be looking at lore and background. We're going to be looking at the units that make up this force. We're going to be looking at how do you want to play this force in order for both fun, but in order to be competitive and to have a level of confidence in how to play them. And then we're going to be looking at list building as far as what handlers, what blacklist elements, if you want to just have fun and add other armies, what do you want to do? So let's go ahead and jump straight into looking at what is the lore and background for Task Force Boone. Task Force Boone is the Expeditionary Brigade combat team that was sent out by the United Martian Protectorate, or the UMP, to fight the UN threat on Able after they had learned of what the UN had done in turning on and being traitors against the other colonial nations' fleets around Able during the first wave. Now, back it up, back in 2025, when Able was discovered and the UN decided that it would take over the HOPE program, the LEAP Act was created, and that was kind of the UN's pet project. The US turns its attention from Able to Mars. For 4 decades, they had been creating research. They had been basically creating the technology needed for the terraforming and colonizing of Mars. And they finally were able to unleash that program. By 2032, they had really started on that. And by 2034, they had already terraformed over 20% of Mars, to the point that among the billionaire, wealthy elite of Earth, they were buying things like bread made out of Martian wheat. They were looking for Olympus Mons steaks from the Mars husbandries. And the money that was being made by these products being sold to the wealthy was going directly back into the US's program to colonize Mars. Now, as the infrastructure was beginning to be built, the US needed people. So they decided that they were going to offer to service members that met the guidelines for what they needed. They had to be able to do specific jobs that were needed on Mars. The US would offer them and up to 10 of their immediate family members relocation to Mars. This was such a success that by 2038, there was over 250,000 US service members and family colonized on Mars, as well as some other smaller enclaves of different nationalities the US had allowed to settle there as well. By 2045, this number had ballooned to 2.5 million Americans as well as others, and they were well on their way to becoming a powerhouse. Now, 2041 was a massive year for Mars, as that was when the United Martian Protectorate decided that it was going to break off from Earth and from the US and become its own self-governing entity, and it would become a major player on the global and the interstellar scale from there on out. Now, as the UMP began to continue to grow and began to further research into things like infrastructure, into things like spacefaring, they found a lot of minerals and ores that they were able to make metals out of, which helped them develop stronger, faster, and more powerful spaceships. They had thicker hulls, they had better armor, even their guns were improved because of this technology. Now, there were advocates among the UN that said that they shouldn't have these because it went against the LEAP Act, but Mars responded by saying, we're not violating the LEAP Act. These ships are for defense of Mars. They're not going in any of our colonizing fleets to Able. This led to a strained relationship between the UN and the UMP, especially once UMP intelligence assets learned that the UN was arming its ships with weapons that went against the LEAP Act, and were doing the very thing they were claiming that the UNP was engaged in. So with these hostilities kind of coming to a head, the UNP began to run training exercises closer and closer to Earth. But when they did, they found out that their ships during training exercises would be shadowed by UN ships and UN elements. All of this came to a head in 2072 when the UN launched its third wave fleet for Able. As it left atmosphere, it unleashed a nuclear barrage against Earth that ended up decimating it and turning it into a nuclear holocaust. With Earth completely in ruins, the third wave fleet for the UN turns its attention to Mars. Now, the UN intel had actually been out of date and just terrible, because it said that the UN was poor, or the UNP was poorly manned, that it was poorly trained, that its assets, its fleet assets were out of date. And what the UN found was that none of these were true. The UNP provided not just stiff resistance, but they sent the UN fleet out of system and then spent the next 3 years hunting down and destroying every single UN asset they could within the Sol system. Now, after 3 years, in 2075, the UNP decided that it was done with war. It had been on a war footing for years, and it wanted to return to civilization with its people and improving on Martian life rather than continuing a conflict. So they chose not to go to Able, but instead to go back into a peaceful setting on Mars. This peace was broken in 2087 when 2 stealth ships that had been there when the UN turned on the first wave national fleets as they began to enter Able and destroyed them, came back. It finally arrived back at Mars and showed a video of what had happened. The UNP government, in an election cycle, was originally planning on keeping it under wraps and saying, we don't need to get involved in another engagement. They're not a threat to us at the moment. They're so far away. They don't have the assets to come and be a threat to us. But there was a member of their government that leaked the video of the UN's attack on the other fleets to the public. And there was a pro-war protest that broke out and forced the UNP to decide to go to war with the UN. This is where Task Force Boone is created. It is the force directly created by the UNP in order to deal with the UN threat. Now, because of the need to travel to Able and not having intelligence of what the current state is, what the UN's military forces currently look like, it was important that Task Force Boone be able to be extremely adaptable, extremely flexible, and be able to arrive in system, create a strategy that they could then carry out because they had versatile assets at their fingertips. In order to help with this, the Task Force Boone broke off a small section of it that was called the Able Rats, or the Calico Jacks, that was sent forth as a reconnaissance team, and it arrived in Able 2 years prior to the main battle force and worked in espionage, worked in reconnaissance. Its goal was to meet up with local assets that they could then embed themselves with and sow dissent. Their goal was to destabilize the UN government and ultimately to create a strategy so that when Task Force Boone arrived in strength with all of its assets, they would immediately know what they were going to do and how they were going to strike.
In 2103, Task Force Boone arrives. Able Rats have a plan. And in 2104, they unleashed their attack upon the UN fleet, completely destroying it, taking it by surprise, while also having superior firepower, superior spaceships. They're able to control space, land on the HARP space elevator, and simultaneously wage a war with the Able Rats and the Headless on the ground, and then with Task Force Boone coming down the space elevator.
At first, they catch the UN by surprise and bloody it brutally, but then the UTG super soldiers are able to join the fray, and the fighting evens out to, after 3 days of brutal combat, it is a stalemate. And that is where we stay today, with the Task Force Boone forces and UN forces simply biding their time in this stalemate, waiting for the other to make a major move that they can then punish and fight their way to victory. But until then, the two sides are content to somewhat lick their wounds and stare at each other from across the battlefield, engaging in skirmishes, engaging in tactical missions, but not an all-out battlefield war front. So with that in mind, we can go ahead and look at the units that make up a Task Force Boone. There are 3 of them, and they are each completely unique from each other in design and in what they do and capability. And as we get into playstyle, you're gonna see why these units are so diverse in what they can do and how that actually makes Boone so much better as a whole. So the first team up is Recon Team. This is a 4-man team. It is made of 2 grunts, it's made of 2 specialists, and it has 2 combat loads, meaning it has access to the armory twice per game. Now, its stat line is pretty unimpressive. A skill of 6, a move of 4, and it throws a single armor dice needing 6s. Nothing impressive, but this is made up for in a lot of ways by its base weapon, which is the heavy rifle that has a 24-inch range and does armor piercing 1. Meaning for a base weapon, it's actually pretty good at taking down stuff because you're reducing those armor. You're taking the Manticore heavy armor and you're bringing that down. You hit a Harlow guy with it and they're just gonna disappear. They die easily anyways, let alone taking away another point of their armor. Now, the 2 specialists really work well in conjunction. One of them is the team leader, and he has a special ability that instead of giving him a ready token or taking a ready action with him, you can give it to another member of the team that has already performed an action. Super useful if you have a guy that moves and then he sprints and he's now in position for Overwatch or maybe to be shot at, so you want to help him return fire. But it works really well in conjunction with specialist number 2, which is the Saw Gunner, and comes equipped with the LMG. Now the LMG has a range of 32 inches. It does damage 1, so not built to take out vehicles or dusters. It's a light machine gun. It's meant for taking out infantry. And the cool thing about it is it has the cyclic and the heavy keyword. With heavy, you get +1 shot if you didn't move. So very useful to be able to be stationary. There's no penalty if you do move, but you get a bonus if you don't move. Cyclic means after you've done 1 shoot action, you can do a second action, shoot action right after that. Because of your team leader, you can shoot, and then be given the ready token by your team leader. The one thing to remember here is your team leader needs to go last. Otherwise, he cannot hand out the token. It has to be to someone who's already performed their action. So make sure you pay attention and use those in the right order. This team is really, really good at fire support. They've got good range, they've got good firepower. They can really just sit back and provide support to the rest of the team. And that brings us to team number 2, and that is VAT Element. Now, VAT is composed of 2 specialists and 1 grunt, and that 1 grunt has 2 combat loads, so 2 accesses to the armory. That's very useful. Exact same stat line as Recon Team, 6 skill, 4 move, and then 1 armor dice of 6. But they come equipped with a different weapon. They come with a carbine, which has a range of 18 inches, does damage 1, pretty much what all basic weapons do, but has the CQB rule. And that keyword means that if you're within half range, so 9 inches, you can reroll all failed shots. So you've got pretty basic stat line, close range gun, nothing super impressive about them so far, but the specialists really help this team shine. Because number 1 is the data specialist. They've got a data knife for 6 inches, so you can really go to war with those AI units and those powered units and do some real serious damage to them. It allows you to counter some E-war if your guys are in danger of getting pinned, things like that. You can use this guy to combat that. Super useful stuff. And then I really, really love specialist number 2, which is also a saw gunner, and he has the compact LMG. So basically the smaller version of what Recon Team specialists have. And it has a 24-inch range, still a good range, not the same as the other one, does damage 1, but it has the cyclic and it has the CQB rule. Pairs again really well with Recon Team. So if Recon Team, or with VAT Element, so if Recon Team is really good at providing fire support, that element is built to get in close. It's built to use the fire support from Recon Team to move forward, take objectives, get into close firefights with the enemy. The final unit for Task Force Boone is the Razorback, and this is a beast. This rounds out this force so well. It's an awesome model and it's so much fun to use. It's a single model. It has a skill of 5, a movement of 4, and it rolls 3 armor dice, needing 4s. That is so impressive. And on top of that, it has a 2 damage track, meaning essentially it has 2 hit points, but it's still infantry. Now, this is mitigated a little bit by it having the AI keyword, meaning susceptible to E-War, susceptible to data knives, EMPs, things like that. And it also has drone. Drone means that it can't get involved in close quarters combat. So base to base, it can't fight, can't be fought, it can't engage in that. And then it can't use ladders because of drone, and it cannot lean out. So those are some minuses. There's a lack of mobility there. But once again, the mobility is filled by recon team. That's kind of their goal, get in. And this is really the damage soaking, heavy damage dealing element to Task Force Boone. It actually comes with 2 separate weapons, both of which are phenomenal. The first is the Gauze Saw. This has a 32-inch range, does 1 point of damage. It has cyclic, armor piercing 2, and auto 2. Armor piercing 2, obviously drop the armor of the opponent by 2. With cyclic, you can fire and then you can fire a second time, or you can fire and then take that ready action or ready token, and you are prepared for your opponent's turn and still able to react and do those things. Auto 2 means that after you have made a shot, you can then make, for this it would be 2 additional shoot actions after your first one to an enemy that is within 4 inches of your original target. Obviously situational, but it's a great way to blow apart enemies that have grouped up into small groups, especially with more shield being used by different forces. They want to stick together. This is the gun to separate them, to force them to play apart, or if they're going to be together, to just absolutely rip into them. The second weapon the Razorback has is the ATGM, which has a range between 6 inches and 32 inches. It does 2 damage, and it has Blast 1, which is really nice, but the kicker is it also has the indirect keyword, which means instead of using the Razorback's line of sight, you can use the line of sight of anybody within that group. So if you're running Task Force Boone, any one of those 3 units, you can use anybody's line of sight for this weapon. That's absolutely brutal. It's great at taking out groups because of blast, but it's then good at taking out a duster or a vehicle that's maybe around a corner because you've got indirect and it does damage too. Very useful. The firepower with the Razorback mixed with the natural ability of recon team to kind of sit back there and take out smaller things, and then you've got VAT Element, which is moving forward and getting in close. You really cover a lot of bases of what you want to be able to do. Now, when it comes to playstyle and how you want to play Boone, this is unique from every other force because it's a jack of all trades. Harlow's got speed, Manticore's just kind of that slow plodding armor. With UN, you've got high skill but low bodies. With these guys, you have everything. Now, you're not great at any of it. You don't have superior skill, but you've got really good firepower. You're not incredibly fast. You don't have a lot of speed abilities, but you've got your close range guys. You've got your VAT Element that can close really well. So they do a lot of things well, and they're not terrible at anything. There's nothing that Task Force Boone is bad at. So we've got to understand how we want to play these guys because they're going to play different than other forces you have. So as we look into how to play them, let's start with looking at our force rule. Now, this is a super powerful one. The force rule says that any model once per turn in your force that is not an AI or powered, so not your Razorback, is able to do a data attack. So you could pin down another unit by this special rule with any model in your entire force other than the Razorback. This is huge at getting an enemy pinned down that you're like, hey, I want to either flank them, or maybe they're out in the open and I want to make sure that they can't get out of there. Maybe they're a major threat, and so you're like, hey, if they stay there, they've got to choose, are they going to sprint to get out of into cover, or are they going to use that action to shoot and leave themselves in the open? It provides a lot of tactical availability options that you have available to you. Now, the battle drills for this force are also in keeping with the theme of versatility, adaptability, do a lot of different things well. The first one is overwhelming fire. And if you use this drill, what it does is if you have a unit with the cyclic keyword, which would be the Razorback, it would be the Saw Gunners for either of the teams. If somebody is returning fire against them, they can only ever roll 1d10. This is actually really good because it makes your guys' firepower more effective because they're not going to get blown up, chances are, before they shoot. It means you're probably going to win those firefights. It means even if you're attacking a high skill opponent, the amount of dice you're throwing should be able to do enough to take them down and you win that firefight outright. This is a huge battle drill, absolutely awesome, and it increases your firepower just a little bit, just enough to really overcome some stronger units that enemy forces might be able to throw at you. Battle drill number 2 is small unit tactics, and at first read you might go, this is not a very good one, because what it does is you take half of a unit and it rounds up. So if it's VAT Element, it's going to be 2 of them, if there's 3 of them left. But if it's recon, like half of them, so 2 and 2. Half of them, instead of repositioning, they can shoot in the repositioning step. Now this may seem like, well, that's terrible because all you're doing is you're giving up your movement. This isn't always useful, but it's situationally awesome. If you have an opponent set up to overwatch, if you have an opponent that's set up that they're gonna blow your team apart if you move, these guys are great at, they activate, they fire first so they don't trigger overwatch, they take out the enemy, and then the rest of your guys are safe to move. I've gone whole games without this ever being needed, but there have been games when I was able to pull this out and was like, oh my gosh, this is a game winner. This is game changing for me. So it's, once again, it's that versatility. It allows you to do something that no one else can do, and it allows your mobility to be a little bit better, and it allows you to have a threat to the opponent that they might look at your stat line and go, well, I'm not worried. But then you can pop this and really become a threat in the movement, in the repositioning phase. The final battle drill is tactical positioning. And the unit you pop this on, if they're being shot by Overwatch, you take away 1d10 from your opponent's Overwatch and shots. Sustainability. Once again, this is not, it doesn't do it either. The other 2 battle drills does. One gives you more firepower, one gives you a little bit of versatility to catch the enemy out, and then this one gives you a little bit more sustainability. Provides your guys with some safety as they move around. They can't get overwatched off the board as easily because this will oftentimes leave your opponent throwing a single dice, and that is honestly, especially if they're a low skill army, not a good chance they're going to use their action and not get a whole lot out of it. Now, on top of the versatility of the battle drills, the usefulness of that force rule to really help you gain a leg up in the mobility game, you've got a awesome arm rate. Maybe my favorite in the game now. I still love Harlow's. They've got some good options there, but this one is like right there with it, especially because of the versatility it provides to an already versatile army. So for Task Force Boone, the first thing you have is the disposable launcher, which gives VAT and Recon team both the ability to take down dusters and vehicles with this weapon because it is damage 3, but more importantly, it is not only a blast weapon, but it also has access to a decent range. Now, 18 inches isn't really a super long range, but for a blast weapon, a grenade style thing, it is a really good range. So this is very useful, especially if you're VAT Element and you're closing in and the enemy is maybe grouped up and you just want to, hey, pop this, launch a grenade into their midst and hopefully take out a few of them. Speaking of grenades, you have the pulse grenade. It's got a short range of 8 inches, but it's great at taking out those AI and those powered units because it takes away that armor save. Something like the Psycha team should be really, really scared of this because it really mitigates a lot of their damage. And with the lack of mobility a Psycha team has, That element can once again get in close, chuck one of these in, and you are creating a lot of damage, subverting the strength of the Psychic team, which is their armor. Smoke grenades is super great. It's like every other smoke in the game. Place it within 4 inches. You can block line of sight. You can gain cover. The fact that this is an armory and not using a control point for a battle drill is huge. It's so crazy because you could technically use 5 of these within a game. And once again, it just provides versatility. It helps in the movement game. It helps in the shooting game of you can shoot, they can't shoot because of visibility. It gives you cover if you're in the open. A lot of versatility there. And finally, they have tracking bombs, a healthy range of 16 inches. But that is further aided by the fact that it has the indirect keyword. And not only does it have the indirect keyword, but it also has armor piercing too. So you've got a golem, you've got a manticore guy, they're sitting around a corner thinking, we're safe. Use one of your other guys' lines of sight and absolutely light them up and take them down. Super, super useful weapon at getting in close. Not super close because it does have a decent range. Being able to take guys out of line of sight. Now, with all of that in mind, with the armory, battle drills, the force rule, let's talk about how do you actually want to play Boone. In all the games I've played, I've learned something really quick, and that is that it's a mistake to walk in and go, this is exactly how I'm going to play this game, and I'm not going to divert from my strategy. The strength of Boone is that you can play it a million different ways. It doesn't have a clear weakness. If you're playing Manticore, run around it. Your strength is speed over them. If you're playing Harlow, you want to turn it into a gunfight because they simply cannot stand up to it. If it's UN, pour in fire, take down a couple models, and your advantage is massive. Now, with Boone, it doesn't matter. You don't want to get into a gunfight because they've got recon team, they've got the Razorback. You don't really have the element of speed because they've got so many close range. They've got a couple indirect where you're thinking you're safe, you've played aggressively, but then they take advantage of it. They've got some durability with the Razorback where it can soak up some punishment. And so there's a lot that they do. You need to be willing to change and to adjust and to adapt to the flow of the game and what your opponent is doing. Now, I want to talk about 2 big mistakes I found myself doing over and over and over again. The first one is with the Razorback, is the stat line is phenomenal. The armor is phenomenal. And so you think you can kind of just sit it there and it will be safe and it can soak up all this damage and it's not going to go down. And I found that when I don't place it well, it gets shot off the board turn 1 because it is a massive focus of the enemy. That anti-material rifle UN is hauling is going to obliterate it. There's a lot of things with blast that are going to take away its armor advantage. So be careful with it. It's useful. I think its durability is really useful in a firefight. And what I mean by that is pop out and be willing to soak up return fire. A lot of times you want to find ways to bait out actions so you're not shooting at guys that can return fire. The Razorback can pretty comfortably shoot at guys and take the return fire because you can't return fire with a blast weapon. Therefore, you really have the advantage with your armor and you're going to be probably okay against most opponents. So don't think it can just sit in the middle of the street like it's the OK Corral and just take bullet after bullet. Don't do that. Use it well to unleash its firepower very directed. The other mistake I made was when I would get to the trap of I'm going to play VAT Element by being really aggressive and I'm going to play Recon Team by being very passive and kind of sitting there and supporting them. Depending on your opponent, that's a good or bad match, and you need to understand how your opponent's playing. If they're playing passive, there's a lot of room for you to be aggressive with VAT Element. Now, maybe you're playing one where they're playing so passive, you need to be more aggressive with Recon Team too. Maybe they're aggressive and say they're UN and they're aggressive. Well, you don't want that element caught out by UN because they'll obliterate them. So you got to play a little bit more cagey with them. Be willing to adapt. There's things where I've realized, listen, I'm willing to trade my Razorback for the enemy UN marksman. It's a worthwhile trade-off for me because I've got more models, but that's their huge threat to me. And so if I can bait that UN marksman out to come out in the open and shoot at me and give me a chance in the next turn to retaliate and get them in the open, it might be worth it. So be willing to be versatile and change how you're using everything. Change your strategies as much as you need in order to get those wins. Now let's talk list building. And list building with Boone is either easier or it's harder than with any other force. When you're playing smaller games, it's harder because your guys are all about synergy. And so if you're gonna play like a handler and one unit, you are going to be hurting because you don't have synergy. I would take recon team in that moment. They've got good firepower. They've got, you know, same stat line as VAT Element, but they've got an extra body. Their weapons have some extra range. They got the armor piercing. They've got the two accesses to the armory is super useful. And then that team leader with that saw gunner combo in a small game just absolutely lights people up. If you're gonna play 2 units, I would either go for VAT Element with recon team, or I'd go VAT Element with the Razorback. Because once you go to 2, that Razorback has really good firepower and it can do a lot to kind of protect the back line while VAT Element moves up. You play VAT Element and recon team, there's a lot of bodies and they work well supporting one another and filling in each other's weaknesses. Now, if you want to talk handlers, here's the reality: you can't go wrong with a single one of them because every handler has their own specialty and all you're doing is you're giving a strength to your force. There's no weakness to cover up. There's nothing that Boone does bad that you need to go, well, I need this because I don't have firepower, so I need the assault handler, or I need the siege handler, I need the marksman for the range, you got the Razorback for the range. And so you can pick any one of them and use them well. Just play to their strengths. Every single one of them is useful. I think the covert may be my favorite with Boone because he can, it's one that can just play on its own, and I let it play on its own and I use it as kind of a one shot due to Ghost being able to phase through walls and things like that. If I'm playing against another handler, which is typically the case, you're bringing a handler, I kind of use my covert to hunt down their handler and deal with it that way, rather than putting a bunch of firepower into their handler and spending a lot of resources on it. Now, if you're looking to add blacklist in either the Sazbla or the Bannock, I think either one of them, and it depends on what you're going for. I think Sazbla is really useful because that firepower with 24 inches and medium works well with recon to form a pretty powerful gun line of your base guys. Their marksman specialist is useful to take down highly armored infantry. That's a nice extra bonus there. The second jammer is useful, I guess. Not my favorite thing in the game to have 2 jammers. You already have one, but once again, useful. It's not the reason I would get the unit. With Bannock, same thing. Pairs super well with VAT Element because they've got the shorter range guns with the CPV. For them, I think, the data knife specialist isn't very helpful. You've already got one of those. Another one's not a huge bonus, but whatever, it's good. It's not bad, but it's good. I think the real bonus there is the inorganic, who adds some speed, who adds some durability, and adds some firepower all in itself. So I think either one of those, I don't know that one's better than the other. I think it depends on your play style. I think it depends on what you want to get out of them. And then if you're going to go for, let's just, you and a friend are looking to put forces together. You're just playing a fun game where you're going to mix and match different forces together. Literally any single other force works well with Boone. You add in UN Raid Force. Oh, now you've got Jack of all trades, and then you're really high on the skill department. You're going to add Manticore when you've got Jack of all trades, and you're really good on the durability front. Harlow, you've got speed. I would say with 3rd Battalion, probably not. That's probably the weakest. That's the weakest pairing, is putting 3rd Battalion and Task Force Boone together. Not bad, but I just don't think it doesn't maximize as much because of what 3rd Battalion does, and we'll be covering that in our next video. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Hopefully if you're new to the game and you're watching this, it gives you a better idea of who Boone is. And if you are looking for an army to start with, if this sounded interesting, definitely go pick up Boone. You won't regret it. It's such a fun army to play. It's such a fun collection of models to paint. These are probably my favorite models, second favorite models that I've painted for BLKOUT. Hopefully for you more experienced ones, you have some thoughts, you've got some ideas for me. Throw it down below. If there's anything you disagreed with, I'd love to know what it is. Something that you think maybe I nailed, let me know that as well. I love any of the feedback you guys can provide to help us get deeper into BLKOUT and do better with these videos. But until next time, I'll catch you guys later.